Some grief does not scream. It waits. It hides in quiet places in the hours before dawn, when even monsters feel human. The cemetery behind the obsidian palace was forbidden to servants. Not because of rules written on stone but because of rules written in fear. No human was allowed near the resting place of vampire royalty. The ground there belonged to eternity. Yet tonight someone had broken that rule. The mist clung low to the earth, curling around black marble gravestones like ghosts unwilling to leave. Silver moonlight filtered weakly through twisted iron trees, casting long shadows that looked like reaching hands. And in the center of it all stood the most feared being in the immortal world. The Vampire King. King Lucian Valerius did not wear his crown tonight. He did not wear armor, nor the ceremonial robes that reminded everyone he was untouchable. He wore only a long black coat, its fabric still as stone, its darkness blending into the night. He stood before a single grave. Smaller than the others. Lonelier than the others. His son's grave. Prince Adrian Valerius had been dead for 9 years, 3 months and 12 days. Not a single night had passed without the king remembering the exact number. Vampires did not forget. Especially not their failures. The grave was simple compared to his status. No towering monument. No elaborate statues. Only a name carved into dark marble. Adrian Valerius. Beloved son. Lost too soon. The king stared at the stone, his crimson eyes reflecting nothing but absence. He had ruled empires. He had commanded armies older than most civilizations. Entire nations trembled at the sound of his name. But none of that power had been enough to save one small boy. His boy. The night air shifted slightly. And then he saw it. White lilies rested at the base of the grave. Fresh. Untouched by frost. Lucian froze. He had not placed them there. No one had permission to come here. No one would dare. His senses sharpened instantly. Every sound became clearer. Every movement of the air whispered secrets. The predator within him awakened, ancient and merciless. And then he heard it. A sound so fragile it almost didn't exist. Breathing. Uneven. Shaking. Someone was crying. Slowly, carefully, Lucian stepped forward, silent as death itself. The mist parted around him as if obeying its master. Behind the gravestone, hidden in shadow, was a figure. Small. Human. A young woman in a servant's uniform. She was kneeling in the dirt, her thin shoulders trembling. Her head rested gently against the cold marble, as if she were afraid to let go. Her hands clutched the earth like it was the only thing keeping her alive. She had not noticed him. Lucian's eyes narrowed. A maid. He recognized her vaguely. One of the countless invisible humans who cleaned the palace floors, who lowered their eyes and held their breath whenever vampires passed. Humans were fragile creatures. Temporary creatures. They were not meant to carry grief that belonged to immortals. And yet this one did. Her sobs were quiet, desperate, as if she had taught herself how to suffer silently. Lucian felt something unfamiliar twist inside his chest. Not anger. Not yet. Confusion. Why would a human maid mourn his son? He took one more step. A branch snapped softly beneath his boot. The sound was barely audible, but she heard it. Her body went rigid instantly. Slowly, trembling, she lifted her head. Her face was pale, her cheeks wet with tears. Dark hair clung to her skin, and her wide eyes glistened with raw fear. When she saw him, her breath stopped. The Vampire King. Standing only feet away. Death itself had found her. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then instinct took over. She collapsed forward, bowing deeply, her forehead pressing into the cold ground. "My king," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Forgive me." Her body shook violently. She knew the punishment for trespassing here. Execution would be mercy. Lucian stared down at her. He had watched humans beg for centuries. It had never moved him before. But something about her felt different. Not her fear. Her grief. It was real. Painfully real. He spoke, his voice low and controlled. "Why are you here?" She flinched at the sound as if the words themselves could hurt her. I'm sorry, my king," she whispered. "I know I don't belong here." That was not my question. Silence fell between them. The mist curled tighter. She didn't move. Didn't breathe. Lucian stepped closer until he stood beside the grave. Beside her. Beside the truth. His gaze fell to the lilies. "Did you bring these?" Her fingers tightened against the dirt. "Yes," she whispered. "Why?" She hesitated. Lucian could hear her heart pounding. Fast. Terrified. Human. Fragile. And then she said something that made the immortal king's entire world stop. Because he loved them. Lucien's eyes snapped to her. The air itself seemed to freeze. Only 3 beings had known that truth: the king, his son, and the maid who had once cared for him. His voice became dangerously quiet. "How?" he asked slowly. "Do you know that?" Her shoulders trembled harder. Tears fell freely now, soaking into the soil. She lifted her head just enough to look at the grave. Not at the king. Never at the king. "At night," she whispered. "He used to tell me that lilies reminded him of peace." Lucien felt something crack inside his chest. Memories he had buried clawed their way back to the surface. Adrian's small voice. Adrian's gentle heart. Adrian's loneliness. The king dropped to one knee before he even realized he was moving. For the first time in centuries, he was no longer looking down at someone. He was looking at her as an equal. "What is your name?" he asked. She swallowed. "Elena, my king." Elena. The name felt fragile. Human. Alive. He studied her carefully. She was thin. Exhausted. Her hands were rough from labor. Her uniform was worn. This was not someone who held power. This was someone the world had ignored. Yet she had remembered his son, when no one else had. Lucien's voice softened, almost against his will. "How did you know him?" Her breath caught. Her eyes filled with fresh tears. And when she spoke, her words shattered the silence forever. "He wasn't just your prince," she whispered. "He was my friend." The king stopped breathing. Because in that moment, he realized the truth he had never been brave enough to face. His son had not died alone. And the girl kneeling before him was the last person who had loved him. The words hung between them like a fragile thread holding together 2 broken worlds. "He was my friend." No one had ever spoken of the prince that way before. Not the council. Not the generals. Not even Lucien himself. To them, Adrian had been an heir. A symbol. A future king. But never just a boy. Never just someone who needed a friend. The vampire king remained kneeling beside the grave, his crimson eyes fixed on the fragile human girl who had just reshaped his memories with a single sentence. Elena. She looked small beneath the endless sky, her thin frame trembling, her hands still pressed into the damp earth. She did not look like someone capable of holding secrets powerful enough to shake a kingdom. And yet she had. Lucien spoke quietly. "When did you meet him?" Elena hesitated. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because speaking it aloud would make the past real again. "It was 9 years ago," she said softly. "During winter." Lucien remembered that winter. It had been one of the coldest in centuries. War had threatened the northern borders. The council had demanded his presence night after night. Diplomacy, strategy, survival. He had told himself he was protecting his son's future. He hadn't realized he was abandoning his son's present. Elena continued, her voice distant, as if she were no longer standing in the cemetery but somewhere far away. "I was new to the palace," she said. "Just a servant. No one important." Lucien almost interrupted her. No human in his kingdom had ever been important. That had been the rule. That had been the lie. "I was cleaning the east corridor," she went on. "The one no one uses anymore." Lucien knew it. An old part of the palace, forgotten by time and power. A place where silence lived. "I didn't see him at first," she said. "He was sitting on the floor." Lucien's chest tightened. He could see it clearly now. A small boy with dark hair and curious eyes, sitting alone where no one could see him. "Was he crying?" Lucien asked quietly. Elena nodded. "Yes." The word struck him harder than any weapon ever had. "He tried to hide it," she said. He wiped his face quickly and stood up like he wasn't afraid. Lucien closed his eyes briefly. That sounded exactly like Adrian. Even then he had tried to be strong. Even then he had tried to be a king. "He apologized to me," Elena whispered. Lucien's eyes opened instantly. "For what?" Elena gave a sad smile. "For being in my way." The vampire king felt shame crawl through his immortal veins. His son had apologized for existing. Elena continued. "I told him he wasn't in my way. I told him he could stay as long as he wanted." Her fingers tightened slightly in the soil. "He asked me what humans did when they were sad." Lucien frowned. "What did you tell him?" She looked down at the grave. "I told him humans talk to someone they trust." Silence followed. The mist shifted gently around them. "And did he?" Lucien asked. Her voice broke. "Yes." That single word carried more truth than centuries of royal history. "He came back the next night," she said. "And the night after that. And the night after that." Lucien listened, unmoving. "He didn't want to be Prince Adrian," she whispered. Not with me. She finally turned her head slightly, her eyes filled with quiet pain. He just wanted to be Adrian. Lucien's throat tightened. For centuries he had taught his son how to rule. He had never taught him how to be happy. Elena's voice trembled. He asked me about human things. Like what? Lucien asked. She smiled faintly through her tears. Sunrise. Lucien froze. He had never seen one, she said. Of course he hadn't. Vampires didn't walk in sunlight. They survived in shadows. He asked me what it looked like, she continued. So I described it to him. Her voice softened, almost warm. I told him the sky turns gold. That the light feels gentle. That it makes everything look alive. Lucien imagined his son listening to those words, his small face filled with wonder. Wonder Lucien had never given him. He said he wished he could see it, Elena whispered. The king felt something inside him fracture. A wish. So simple. So impossible. And you? Lucien asked carefully. What did he mean to you? Elena didn't answer immediately. She reached out slowly and brushed her fingers against the cold marble. He was kind, she said. He never treated me like I was nothing. Lucien flinched slightly. Because that was exactly how everyone else had treated her. Including him. He listened, she continued. He laughed. He cared. Her voice broke again. He made me feel like I mattered. Lucien stared at her. This fragile human girl had given his son something he never had. Belonging. And then Lucien asked the question he had feared most for 9 years. What happened, he said quietly, the night he died? Elena's entire body froze. Her breathing stopped. Her hands trembled violently. The cemetery grew colder. Even the mist seemed to retreat. Lucien waited. Immortal patience meant nothing when facing mortal truth. Finally, Elena whispered 4 words that shattered the king's last illusion. They thought he was human. Lucien's eyes widened. What? Her voice cracked. He wasn't wearing his royal crest. He said he was tired of everyone bowing. Lucien remembered that crest. A small silver symbol that marked Adrian as untouchable. Protected. Safe. Without it, he was just a child. Just a target. The guards found us, Elena said, tears falling freely now. I tried to tell them who he was. Her voice became weaker. They didn't listen. Lucien's heart began to pound. They thought I was lying. The king's hands slowly clenched into fists. And then, she whispered, they raised their weapons. Lucien stopped breathing. Because he finally understood. His son had not died in war. His son had not died by enemy hands. His son had died because his own kingdom had failed to see him. Failed to protect him. Failed to listen. Elena's final words broke completely. I tried to save him. Silence consumed everything. The vampire king knelt beside his son's grave, staring at the human girl who had carried this truth alone for 9 years. 9 years of silence. 9 years of grief. 9 years of guilt. And in that moment, Lucien realized something that terrified him more than any enemy ever could. This girl had loved his son when he had not been there. This girl had stayed when everyone else had turned away. This girl had suffered alone. Because of him. The dawn crept slowly over the obsidian towers of the Valerius Palace, spilling cold, silver light across the land. Inside the empty halls, the echoes of the past seemed louder than the present. Every step of the vampire king's boots reverberated against the marble floors, yet he felt more fragile than he had in centuries. Elena walked beside him, her small frame tense and uncertain, yet her hands no longer trembled when they brushed against his coat. She was human. Fragile. Mortal. And yet, in her grief, in her courage to stand at the grave, she had revealed truths that even the most loyal counselors had buried beneath centuries of protocol. Why didn't anyone listen? Lucien asked, his voice low, brittle with rage. He had lived through countless betrayals, fought wars with immortal armies, and survived assassins whose names had been erased from history, but nothing had ever felt this personal, this raw. Elena lowered her eyes. They were afraid, she whispered. Fear made them blind. The word struck him like a blade. Fear, something he had relied on his entire reign to control, had killed his son. And now, fear had nearly buried the girl who had loved him most. They reached the doors to the throne room. Normally, Elena would have been pushed back, barred by guards or warnings. Tonight Lucien said nothing. Instead, he opened the doors himself, and the heavy wood groaned under centuries of unspoken tension. Inside the council waited. Ancient vampires with eyes like obsidian and hearts forged in shadow. They had expected him to enter alone, to bring the morning reports, to assert his dominance as always. And yet here he stood, with a human girl at his side, a girl who had the audacity to speak the truth about the death of their prince. A murmur ran through the chamber. It was not surprise that unsettled them. They had survived rebellions, betrayals, and assassinations. No, it was the audacity of his trust, of his recognition, that unnerved them. This woman, Lucien said, his voice ringing through the room like steel against stone, is under my protection. The room froze. The council leader, an elder named Veyron, stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. Your Majesty, this human? She is not just a human, Lucien interrupted, cutting the word short with a sharp gesture. She knew my son when no one else did. She loved him when I was too blind to care. And she is here because she carries the truth that my kingdom has denied for years. A tense silence followed. The other council members shifted, some looking away, others clutching ceremonial daggers. This was not just a breach of protocol, it was a challenge to centuries of tradition. Elena's hands clenched at her sides. Her lips trembled. She had expected anger, threats, perhaps even dismissal. She had not expected to be protected in front of the very council that had overlooked her for 9 years. Lucien's eyes softened slightly as he looked down at her. Tell them everything, he commanded. Let them hear the truth or let them be complicit in the lies that killed my son. Her voice trembled at first. 9 years ago, she began, the prince wanted nothing more than to be himself. Not a symbol. Not a future king. He was lonely, and I was the only one who saw him for who he truly was. The council shifted uneasily. Some faces betrayed disbelief, others betrayed guilt. The night he died, Elena continued, he was tired of pretending. He took off his crest, the mark of royalty, and just wanted to sit quietly, unnoticed. Lucien's chest tightened. Every word she spoke was a dagger to his soul. He had trained men to follow orders, not to question kings. Yet here he was, learning truths his own advisors had hidden from him, and realizing that obedience had been murder. The guards thought he was a human intruder, Elena said, her voice breaking. I begged them to listen but they did not. They struck him once and that was all it took. Silence fell. Even the ancient vampires could not escape the weight of her words. Lucien's hand hovered near her shoulder, not touching. He was unsure if he could comfort her without shattering completely himself. Centuries of power had never prepared him for the fragility of human courage, or the devastation of human loss. I have kept this secret for 9 years, Elena whispered, because leaving felt like abandoning him twice. But I come here now because someone should remember him as more than a mistake. A low murmur of disbelief rippled through the council. Veyron's voice cut sharply through the tension. Your Majesty, to trust a human with the truth of Valerius' blood, this is unprecedented. Dangerous even. What do you intend? Lucien's crimson eyes blazed with an intensity that silenced the room. Justice, he said simply. For my son. For the girl who loved him. And for this kingdom which has forgotten the meaning of compassion. The words hung in the air. Justice. A word that had never been spoken in this chamber without steel and fire. Elena's lips parted slightly as if she could not believe she was hearing them. Protection. Recognition. Respect. And for the first time since she had knelt at Adrian's grave, she felt less like a servant and more like someone who mattered. Lucien continued, his voice steadier now, colder, yet laced with emotion. From this moment forward, the kingdom will remember the prince as he truly was. And anyone who stands in the way of the truth will answer to me. A ripple of tension spread through the council, but Lucien did not flinch. He had survived centuries of treachery. He would survive this. Elena looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I never expected this, she whispered. You never expected to be seen, Lucien replied. But sometimes the truth is stronger than fear. And you have proven that. She blinked, her chest heaving. I just wanted him to be remembered. And he will be, Lucien said firmly. Because of you. For the first time, the girl who had grieved alone at the grave was not alone. She was beside the vampire king himself, protector of his son, and now, the bearer of a secret that would shake the very foundations of the Valerius dynasty. Outside, the sun rose higher, spilling pale gold through the high windows. The light seemed hesitant, respectful of the power and grief inside. Lucien turned slightly to Elena, his voice softer now, almost human. We will need to be careful, he said. Not everyone will accept the truth, but together we will see it done. Elena nodded. Her heart raced, not just with fear but with a strange spark of hope. She had survived 9 years of silent pain. Perhaps now, for the first time, the world might finally see her courage. And the Vampire King, immortal, feared, and all-consuming, was no longer just a distant figure of shadow. He was her ally, her protector, and though neither would admit it yet, the first ember of something far more dangerous: love. The palace was quiet after the council meeting, but the air felt charged, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Lucian walked beside Elena through the vast corridors, their footsteps echoing against cold marble. The dawn had faded into morning, yet the sunlight barely touched the inner halls of the Valerius palace, filtered through stained glass and high arches. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the folds of her simple servant's dress. She was a human, small and fragile, yet she had walked into the throne room and faced the most powerful vampires in the kingdom. She had spoken truths that others had hidden for centuries, and in doing so she had shaken the foundation of Lucian's empire. Lucian's crimson eyes followed her every movement. The anger, the grief, and the immense responsibility he carried pressed against him like centuries of chains. And yet, beside Elena, something unexpected began to stir. A fragile trust, a quiet warmth, a spark of connection that neither immortality nor fear could erase. "You carry more than grief, Elena," he said softly, breaking the silence. "There is something else, something you are not telling me." She paused, glancing up at him, her dark eyes meeting his with a mixture of fear and resolve. I was going to tell you," she whispered, "but I wasn't sure if you would believe me." Lucian stopped and turned fully toward her. His expression was unreadable, yet his voice carried the weight of centuries. "Try me. I am a king. I have faced assassins, armies, betrayals, and curses. There is nothing you could say that would frighten me." Elena's lips parted, as if she wanted to speak but feared the magnitude of what lay inside her. She took a deep breath and finally revealed her secret. "I can speak the old tongue," she said. "The language of the ancients, the same that was spoken by your kind centuries ago." Lucian's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise passing through his otherwise stoic demeanor. Few humans in the world, even in the lands beyond his kingdom, had ever been able to speak it fluently. It was the language of power, of rituals, of forgotten magic. "Why would you know it?" he asked cautiously, his voice low. "My mother," Elena began, "was a healer. She knew things most humans forgot. Before she died, she taught me, not just the language but the knowledge of cures, of remedies that could heal what most thought was beyond saving." Lucian studied her carefully. This was no ordinary human. She was fragile, yes, but she carried knowledge and abilities that could rival centuries of vampire wisdom. She could heal, she could preserve life, she could perhaps even have saved his son if given the chance. He felt a pang of guilt, sharp and unrelenting. 9 years of grief, 9 years of questioning, 9 years of wondering if he had done enough. And here stood the girl who could have changed the course of his son's life. Elena looked at him, her eyes steady now, despite the trembling that lingered in her hands. "I know what you're thinking," she said softly. "That I could have done something, that I could have saved him. But I was powerless. I was just a servant. I had no authority, no protection, and the guards, they did not listen." Lucian's jaw tightened. The anger and guilt he had buried for years surged to the surface. He had spent centuries building walls around his heart, around his kingdom, around his sorrow, and now Elena had torn them down with nothing more than truth and courage. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming yet protective. "You are not powerless," he said quietly. "Not now. Not ever." Her lips parted, surprised by the softness in his voice. No one had ever spoken to her that way, not her peers, not her employers, not the strangers in the streets of the human villages. And now the Vampire King himself was telling her she had power. A silence fell, filled only by the distant sound of the wind brushing against the high palace walls. For a moment the human and the immortal stood together, separated by mortality but united by grief, truth, and an emerging bond that neither fully understood. Lucian's eyes softened as he studied her again. "Your loyalty, your courage, your kindness, it is rare in humans," he admitted. "And yet you have shown it in ways that even the immortal heart struggles to recognize. You honored my son when no one else would." Elena's chest tightened. She had never felt so vulnerable yet so seen. The words struck deep, echoing through years of silent suffering, reminding her that kindness, no matter how small, could create ripples that even kings could not ignore. "I only did what I thought was right," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "I couldn't abandon him. Not again." Lucian reached out slowly, stopping just short of touching her shoulder. "You did not abandon him," he said gently. You stayed when I could not. You loved when I could not. And for that I owe you more than words can express." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not just grief, they were relief, recognition, and a fragile spark of hope. She had carried the weight of Adrian's memory alone, yet the vampire king himself acknowledged her courage and truth. "And now," he continued, his voice low and steady, "the kingdom will see what you have done. And perhaps in doing so, we can ensure no one else suffers as Adrian did." Elena nodded, swallowing hard. She knew the path ahead would not be easy. The council, the palace, the world outside, none would accept her so easily. But for the first time she was not alone. She had the vampire king beside her, protector, ally, and perhaps something more. Lucian studied her one last time before turning toward the high windows of the palace. "Prepare yourself," he said. "The truth will not be welcomed. But together, we will face it. And perhaps, along the way you will see that power does not always belong to those with fangs. Sometimes, it belongs to those with courage, kindness, and the will to act." Elena followed silently, her steps growing steadier. She had survived 9 years of fear and sorrow. Now, standing beside a king, a vampire, an immortal, she realized that perhaps the most extraordinary battles were not fought with swords or magic, but with truth, bravery, and the courage to be seen. The sun had set behind the jagged peaks surrounding the Valerius palace, leaving the world bathed in twilight. Shadows stretched across the halls like living tendrils, but Lucian felt no fear. Not tonight. Tonight, he walked beside Elena, the human maid who had unraveled secrets centuries old, the girl who carried not only grief but courage, wisdom, and a power even he could not fully comprehend. The council awaited them in the grand chamber, their faces masks of authority and suspicion. Some of the elder vampires, sworn to tradition, whispered among themselves, their eyes fixed on Elena with barely disguised contempt. Others, more cautious, kept silent, studying the king, waiting to see if he would falter. Lucian's crimson gaze swept across them, piercing and unwavering. "Tonight," he said, voice low but commanding, "the kingdom will witness the truth. Those who ignored it before will answer for it now." Elena's hands were folded tightly in front of her, but her heart raced with determination rather than fear. This was the night she had feared yet longed for, the night she could finally honor Adrian and perhaps in doing so, save the lives of many who would otherwise fall victim to ignorance and cruelty. Lucian gestured toward her. "Elena," he said, "speak." She swallowed and began, her voice shaking at first but growing steadier as she drew strength from the king's presence. "My prince, your son, he was not just a child of royalty. He was a boy who craved kindness. He trusted humans because no one else gave him reason to trust. The night he died, he was betrayed by fear, by protocol, by those who refused to see the truth." A hush fell over the chamber. Some council members stiffened, while others exchanged uncomfortable glances. Elena stepped closer to the dais, her dark eyes meeting each of them in turn. "I was there. I tried to protect him. I tried to speak, to reason, but fear made monsters of ordinary men. And when the guards struck him, they destroyed more than a boy, they destroyed the chance for the kingdom to know compassion." Lucian's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, a silent anchor of support. Even he, with centuries of control over armies and nations, could feel his heart lurch at her words. Then Elena lowered her gaze to the floor, and something extraordinary happened. Her voice softened, but it carried a strange resonance, a rhythm that seemed almost magical. "The old tongue," Lucian murmured under his breath, recognizing the words. Elena had begun to speak it, a language thought lost to humans, a language of life, healing, and memory. The walls of the chamber seemed to vibrate subtly. Some council members shifted uneasily, even vampires with centuries of experience could feel the power in her speech. "Through this language," she explained, "I can heal what has been harmed and reveal what has been hidden. Your son's memory, the truth of his death, cannot be erased. And those who act in fear, who blind themselves to justice, will be held accountable." Lucian's gaze softened, yet it burned with determination. He realized that this girl, human, fragile, underestimated, was not only the keeper of Adrian's memory but a force capable of shaking the very foundations of the kingdom. A murmur rippled through the council. Elder vampires exchanged worried glances. "Is she claiming authority?" one hissed. "She is claiming truth," Lucian corrected sharply. "And I support her." Then the unexpected happened. Elena stepped forward, placing her hands lightly on a table etched with the Valerius family crest. The faint glow of her words in the old tongue seemed to awaken the etchings, and a soft, almost imperceptible pulse of light spread across the chamber. Gasps escaped from some council members. Even the oldest among them leaned forward, captivated. "She carries the power to heal," Lucien said, his voice steady but filled with awe. "Not through fangs or blood, but through courage, compassion, and knowledge. She reminds us all what it means to be human, to care, to protect, and to act with justice." Elena's gaze flicked up at him, and for a moment, the king saw not just the maid he had known, but a woman whose bravery rivaled any warrior. In that instant, centuries of fear, grief, and guilt melted into something fragile but undeniable: respect, trust, and the first spark of connection that went beyond duty. The council could no longer deny what was before them. Elena had faced the kingdom's most ancient traditions, the shadows of fear, and the truth of a prince's death, and she had not faltered. Lucien stepped beside her, his presence protective yet commanding. "From this moment," he said, "Elena is under my protection. Anyone who opposes her or the truth she carries will answer to me. The kingdom will remember Prince Adrian not as a victim, but as the boy who taught a human and a vampire alike the power of kindness, bravery, and love." The chamber remained silent for a long, heavy moment, the weight of centuries hanging like a shroud. And then, slowly, one by one, some council members bowed their heads, a quiet acknowledgement of the truth they could no longer ignore. Others still hesitated, but Lucien's eyes promised unwavering wrath should they defy justice again. Elena's hands trembled slightly, but her eyes shone with a fierce light. She had survived grief, isolation, and fear. She had spoken truths that terrified the immortal and humbled the council. And now, beside the vampire king himself, she felt the first true sense of belonging she had ever known. Lucien's gaze lingered on her, silent but unmistakable. Protection. Admiration. Something deeper that neither would name yet, but which both could feel simmering beneath the surface. Outside, the first stars of night twinkled faintly. In the quiet that followed, it felt as if the palace itself was holding its breath. Something had shifted, not just within the kingdom, but between the immortal king and the human girl who dared to stand beside him. The first light of dawn crept across the Valerius palace, spilling gold and silver over marble floors that had seen centuries of power, treachery, and silence. But today was different. The halls no longer carried only shadows, they carried truth, reckoning, and a fragile hope. Lucien walked beside Elena, the human maid who had faced grief, fear, and the weight of centuries-old lies, now standing beside him not as a servant, but as a force of truth. Her hands were steady, her gaze unwavering, and her presence, the courage and kindness that had once only drawn him from afar, was now a beacon within the kingdom. The council had convened once more, this time in the high chamber where no shadow dared linger. Some elder vampires still clutched their ceremonial daggers, the traditions of their kind etched into every fiber of their being. Yet even their hearts could not deny the truth that Elena carried. Lucien spoke first, his voice carrying centuries of authority but also the raw emotion of a father who had failed. "Today this kingdom remembers the prince not as a symbol, not as a tool, but as a boy who deserved kindness, compassion, and justice. Those who failed him must answer." Elena stepped forward. "I was there when the world turned its back," she said, her voice clear, strong. "I begged, I pleaded, I tried to stop what could not be undone. But I remained. Not out of fear but out of love, for him, for life, and for truth. Today I stand not for revenge but for justice. And I will not be ignored." A murmur ran through the council. Some bowed, some averted their eyes, and others, hardened by centuries of tradition, clenched their fists. Lucien's crimson gaze swept over them. "Let it be known," he said, "that any who turn against her or against truth will answer to me." Then for the first time Elena revealed her deepest secret, a gift she had kept hidden, one that could heal not only the body but the very soul of the kingdom. She spoke in the old tongue, words imbued with power and compassion, weaving a spell of revelation and restoration. The chamber seemed to breathe with her, the air shimmering faintly as the truth of Adrian's death, the neglect of the council, and the courage of the human girl illuminated every dark corner. The council could not deny what they saw, what they felt. They had ignored the boy once, they would not ignore him or Elena again. One by one their resistance crumbled under the weight of truth, until only respect remained. Lucien turned to Elena, his eyes softened but fierce. "You have done what no one else could," he said. "You have brought justice, saved lives, and reminded a kingdom what it means to be human. And for that, I am indebted to you beyond any words I could speak." Her lips trembled, and for a moment she allowed herself to feel the full weight of their shared victory. "I only did what was right," she whispered. Lucien's gaze lingered on her, and in that instant, centuries of walls and fear began to crumble. He stepped closer, the air between them charged with something forbidden, intimate and undeniable. "You have changed everything," he said softly, his voice low but certain. "Not just the kingdom, not just my son's memory, but me. I'm no longer the king who rules by fear. I am the king who can feel, who can trust, who can love." Elena's eyes widened slightly, and her heartbeat quickened. For the first time in her life, she felt seen not as a servant, not as a human, but as a soul equal to the immortal beside her. The slow burn of trust, respect, and intimacy that had grown between them over the months reached a delicate peak. Their bond, forged in grief and courage, in secret knowledge and protection, now shimmered in the morning light. Lucien reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You are more than anyone ever deserved," he murmured. "And perhaps, in another life, you could have been my queen." Elena's voice shook, a mix of awe and longing. "And perhaps, in this life I am yours in the only way a human can be yours." The moment stretched between them, fragile yet powerful, the world outside waiting, the kingdom ready to see a new era unfold. Lucien's crimson eyes softened, and for the first time he allowed himself to show not just authority but vulnerability. "Then we will face it together. Every challenge, every fear, every shadow. And we will do so as allies, as companions, perhaps one day as something more." Elena's small hand slipped into his, and in that simple touch, a silent promise passed between them. Protection, respect, trust, and the slow awakening of love that had been written in the stars long before either had existed. The council bowed, the chamber warmed with recognition of truth and courage, and the kingdom stirred awake to a new dawn, one where justice had been served, where a human girl had proven herself stronger than centuries of fear, and where a vampire king had learned that even immortals could love. And outside, in the gardens where Adrian had once wandered, the first rays of sun touched the grave he would forever occupy, not as a forgotten child, but as the boy who changed a kingdom, who taught the living the value of courage, compassion, and love.